We are beginning to see the entire universe as a holographically interlinked network of energy and information, organically whole and self-referential at all scales of its existence. A quote by Ervin Laszlo. Out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right-doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. A quote by Rumi. A samadhi beats an orgasm every time. A quote by Unknown. So finally, here we are at the end of this mini-series on spiral dynamics, stage turquoise. We've got beige, purple, red, blue, orange, green, yellow, and finally turquoise. Go back and watch my other episodes so that you have some context for this one. Otherwise, this one's not going to make much sense. Turquoise is tier 2, just like yellow, but really yellow was the beginning of tier 2, and turquoise is where tier 2 is going to fire on all cylinders. This is where the magnificence of being and existence really starts to flower, because tier 2 and turquoise, of course, is going beyond survival, beyond ego, beyond fear, beyond ideology, beyond political parties, beyond racial affiliations or anything like that. This is moving into self-transcendence and selfless living. Now, it's important to understand that every stage within spiral dynamics looks upon all the other stages in spiral dynamics from its own vantage point. And it judges it from its own vantage point, such that right now I'm going to start talking about turquoise, and I'm going to talk a lot about tier 2. But if you're in stage blue or orange or green, you're probably not going to understand, and you're going to judge. Here's how it works with these stages. Every stage basically has at least 1 or 2 other stages on the spiral that it thinks are either criminal, deluded, superstitious, or just downright insane. So some of the things I'm going to be telling you here might sound downright insane to you, or utterly fantastical and impossible, or unscientific. And the reason they're going to seem that way is because you're too far away from stage turquoise. So to you, it's going to seem like I'm going to be presenting some kind of philosophy or an ideology, which is not the case. But you can't appreciate that at the level that you're at. You have to understand that these levels or stages, they're pretty deep things. It's not like that, oh, you can just jump to the next stage after one weekend. You're going to have to really work at it. Sometimes you'll have to work at it for years, sometimes for decades, depending on how much brainwashing you got when you were young, and how open-minded you are and how much work you're really willing to put into this. So just keep that in mind. These stages, they're very significant. They affect how you see the entire world. They actually affect, I want you to think of these stages as they affect the physical world, how you actually see the physics of the world. That's affected by your stage. They affect what you think is worthwhile in life, what you think is relevant or irrelevant, what you think is scientific or unscientific, what you think is reasonable or unreasonable, even what you think is sane versus insane. So something that seems insane at stage blue will seem perfectly sane at stage yellow or turquoise, and vice versa. So just keep that in mind. And in fact, what you consider dangerous both to yourself, but also dangerous to your community and dangerous to mankind as a whole, very much depends on your stage, which is why these stages can get very political, and which is why spiral dynamics is excellent for explaining politics. All the shenanigans and craziness that goes on in politics, very easily explained by spiral dynamics, but really only when you are able to get into tier 2, kind of step above your own stage so that you can step outside of your own biases and outside your own group agendas. Because the problem is that tier 1 has all these group agendas that are clouding its vision. So politics oftentimes becomes all about fears and what you think is the greatest danger to mankind. What do you think it is? Do you think it's the capitalists or it's the communists? Or do you think it's men or women or feminists? Or do you think it's the terrorists? Or do you think it's fundamentalist religion? Or do you think it's materialist science? Or do you think it's the intellectuals? Do you think it's the globalists? Do you think it's the nationalists and the neo-Nazis? Who do you think is threatening all of mankind? That very much depends on what stage you're at. And of course, once you get to the highest stages, you will see that really there's nothing to fear and there's no danger at all, because it's all just a game. But you certainly won't understand that until you start to get into Turquoise. Everything up to Turquoise was kindergarten. You might think you've been working real hard for the last 10, 20 years, doing all this personal development stuff on yourself, going up from blue to orange, building your business, going into green and joining protest movements and fighting for civil rights, and then joining yellow, moving up into yellow and becoming academic and learning all of this stuff. And you think you now understand the world so much better than you did when you were down at stage blue, let's say, where you started maybe. And you think you've gotten all this progress, and in a sense, of course you have. You've grown enormously, but that was just 1% of human development that you have achieved. Now, at stage Turquoise and above is the other 99% of all of human development. This is where the real work starts, here at Turquoise. Reality as you know it, physical reality, will start to dissolve. Everything you thought was obvious and certain about the world, all of this starts to dissolve. Now, at Turquoise, you are really ready to jailbreak your mind and to discover what lies beyond the mind. And that's what I'll be talking about. Now, I want to give credit again to Claire Graves, to Don Beck, and to Christopher Cohen for developing this model. They put a lot of work into it. This is, in a sense, their whole life's work. A lot of research went into this, a lot of careful thinking, and interviews with people and so forth, and they wrote books about this. But I should mention that when I'm talking about spiral dynamics, I'm adding a lot of my own ideas and spin on things. I am not just presenting their models strictly. And some people might have a problem with that because it might sound like, well, Leo, then what you're doing is you're distorting their model. You're not presenting it strictly to their form. There's two ways to look at that. One way is that, yes, I am sort of spinning the model and I'm not presenting it true to the original form. But the other way to look at it is that any model that I present to you, any kind of scientific data or any scientific model or any historical information that I present to you, whether it's Gödel's incompleteness theorem or quantum mechanics or evolutionary theory or something from logic and mathematics or something from psychology, or neuroscience, anything like this that I would present to you, I would always couch it in the larger picture of what we're doing here, which is self-actualization. That's the greatest value that I can give to you. That's what I offer, is that I offer you this information not just presented as some interesting bit of philosophy or some interesting model here or some scientific research or study there that proves some sort of fact. I'm not interested in any of that. What I'm interested in is getting you to the highest, most deepest levels of human understanding of reality and of yourself and of consciousness. So everything I talk about is always geared towards that. And a lot of times, the people that I'm taking my information from or my models from, they themselves have not actually gotten to the deepest levels. So their models, they offer maybe a good stepping stone, which is why I'm talking about them in the first place, but they don't take you to the ultimate end, or there's something that they're missing. Or maybe they're not practical enough for what I want. They're too academic. You see, and in a sense, it's very easy to delude and to confuse people by presenting strictly the facts. Now, that's a counterintuitive principle right there, but nevertheless, it's true. in many situations, if I want to really delude you, what I'll present is strictly the facts, strictly the scientific studies. And what that'll do is that will get you to believe all of the wrong things and to pursue all of the wrong stuff in life. Because strictly speaking, scientific facts and data and studies, these can be interpreted in numerous ways, and they can be used for almost anything, to justify almost anything. And if you're doing science properly, then science never tells you what the right interpretations are, and science never really tells you how you should apply this in your life and what you can do with this to actually develop yourself. Science doesn't go there, because all science really boils down to is quantification and measurements. You're basically measuring reality with a ruler in various forms, and then you're writing down the data. And then, of course, science also cements that together with various theories and metaphysical interpretations, which are often unrecognized, and then those lead to great delusion and great problems. That's the materialist paradigm. So just keep that in mind. What I'm talking about here with Turquoise might be a little bit different than maybe what Don Beck would talk about or what Clara Graves would talk about. The reason I'm talking about that in my own way is because I've actually had quite a few mystical experiences at this point. And so I'm trying to guide you even deeper than just maybe Turquoise itself. So what is the essence of Turquoise? We could call it holistic, global collectivist, and self-transcendent. So once again, the pendulum is swinging. It swung to yellow, which was individualistic, and now it's swinging back to the collective ego, which is an emphasis on collectivism. But the collectivism now is different than it was in green, because the green was also collectivist. In green, collectivist was about sort of joining a group and serving the group identity. With Turquoise, though, now the pendulum swings, and now it's about manifesting the self for the benefit of existential reality, not for your green political party, but for the benefit of existential reality, for life, for the entire planet. You're sacrificing yourself for that. The essence of Turquoise is also to experience the wholeness of existence through mind and spirit. The world is seen as a single dynamic organism with its own collective mind. Everything connects to everything else. A lot of boundaries break down, and there are a lot of ecological alignments for Turquoise. The universe is alive and intelligent. It's not a dumb clockwork machine. Turquoise is interested in building a human community based on mystical wisdom, the deepest wisdom that is possible to access for mankind. Turquoise is interested in cooperative action for elevating the consciousness of mankind. Turquoise is a synthesis of the left and the right brain, east and west, science and religion, mind, body, spirit, and heart. All of it coming together to function very smoothly and effortlessly for the benefit of all of life and all of consciousness. So Turquoise takes a very big picture perspective of what life is about. It's not about me becoming rich or famous or successful. It's not about fighting for some political cause for my little group, even if my group is some environmental group. It's not about saving the whales. It's not about saving some oppressed minority. It's also not about saving some civilization or preserving some sort of hierarchy. It is about getting all of mankind to awaken to the magnificence of existence, to which most of mankind is utterly, utterly asleep. Now, you won't find Turquoise in politics, in government, in education, in business, in the media, and not even in the universities. Now, this is a very important point because most people have never actually met a turquoise human being. So what I'm describing here in a sense might sound like a unicorn to you. And if it seems like what I'm describing is very utopian and idealistic and far-fetched, well, that's just because you need a lot more life experience. And you need to actually go out there and find the turquoise human beings. That they do exist, but they're very rare. Very few of us have actually evolved to this level yet. And if you're expecting to find these people in places like on the media, you're not going to find them there because the media is very orange. So there's no room for turquoise in media. And in business, there's not a lot of room for turquoise in business, not in your Fortune 500 companies. You won't find them in universities either very much. Now, there are exceptions, but for the most part, universities, well, these days universities are turning almost like into businesses. They're very orange in a certain sense. Yes, they're also yellow in a certain sense. But universities are all about the mind. And turquoise is going beyond the mind. So when you're starting to get into turquoise and you're really starting to embody it, you're basically going to be labeled a mystic. And once you're labeled a mystic, you no longer fit into the academic paradigm. The materialist scientific paradigm, you don't fit into it. Now, there will be some exceptions. There are some professors who might have had some mystical experiences, and maybe there's some people who talk about non-duality within universities. They're doing some research. We're making progress there. But for the most part, this is extremely rare. And these people, maybe they'll be invited to speak. Someone like Sadhguru might be invited to speak at a university. But that's not like their core curriculum. That's not something they're actually going to invest serious research in. That's just for flavor. They just invite Sadhguru to have some interesting conversation, but they don't really take him seriously. They don't really understand what he's talking about, right? He's way beyond their level. And someone like Sadhguru would never get tenure in a university. Someone like me would never get tenure in a university because we're not going to jump through their hoops. And the stuff that universities are doing are largely delusional. They don't realize that the map is not the territory. There's very simple, fundamental metaphysical things that these academics and scientists just do not understand, and they refuse to understand because they are in that paradigm. They're bought into it. They were indoctrinated into it. They went to 10 or 15 years of graduate school, and now they're stuck in that paradigm. Don't think that universities are open-minded. They will kick you out if you try to talk about truth too much, because it's a threat to their entire paradigm. Some people can get away with it. Maybe some professor or some speaker can get away with it if what he does is he really dumbs it down and he tries to talk about turquoise level stuff in a very materialistic and crude sort of manner, and that so that it can fit with the materialist paradigm. In that sense, then the university will be a little bit open-minded, but generally not. And even things like TED Talks. You would think that TED Talks are very open-minded, and yet there are TED Talks that were banned from turquoise level people who are presenting turquoise level ideas, but these people are banned not because they're spreading misinformation or because they're irreputable people or they say ugly things. It's just because it's completely outside the sort of materialist paradigm that TED Talks are about. So keep that in mind. Most of society, most political parties, most people in the media, most celebrities, most universities, almost all institutions are closed-minded to turquoise. That's how it always is. When something is way above your head and too advanced for you, then you think it's delusion, and so you're closed-minded to it. That's nothing new. That has happened all throughout human history. People at turquoise usually become gurus, sages, teachers, leaders, visionaries, healers, and clairvoyants. So if you want to find them, then look for them there. Usually they start their own little communities. There are so few of these turquoise people, and then they become so developed that they are in a really good position to build their own community or to be a leader in some other fashion because they have very advanced wisdom and they're able to guide people out of their delusions and help solve many of their spiritual and emotional and other sorts of problems. But they have to kind of do it on their own terms because society doesn't really provide easy infrastructure that will just allow them to just take a normal 9-to-5 job and be able to really embody and teach their ideas. They really have to kind of set up their own thing. So usually you'll find them doing their own stuff. So when does turquoise emerge? Turquoise emerges with the realization that yellow has that it alone, no matter how much it models and understands stuff, it cannot solve the world's problems just through its systemic understanding. There needs to be a community effort to work on these systemic problems that yellow sees. And that's when turquoise emerges. It also emerges when yellow starts to see that consciousness unifies everything and everyone. The idea that consciousness is central, all of the various problems that mankind has, whether it's problems in universities, problems in politics, problems in government, problems with the economy, problems with emotions, problems with depression, problems with addiction, like any problem, it all boils down to consciousness. And that's what turquoise starts to realize. When yellow starts to see, really see very deeply the limits of thinking and modeling and the scientific method and of reason and of logic, when the limits become utterly undeniable, then yellow is ready to go beyond the mind. It's ready to go post-rational, and then turquoise starts to emerge. Turquoise emerges when yellow starts to realize that all of the answers and understanding that it has developed so far has not been the ultimate answer. The ultimate answers have still not been answered at yellow, because the ultimate answers are beyond cause and effect, beyond linear thinking, beyond the mind. And so when yellow starts to pursue those questions seriously and very deeply, then it starts to have glimpses of non-duality, it starts to have direct consciousness of the absolute, and then that's when turquoise can emerge. Turquoise emerges with very serious spiritual practice. That's often what's required to have these deep insights. Turquoise is a flowering of mysticism. When boundaries start to dissolve between self, other, and world, physical boundaries, the physical stuff that you thought was utterly undeniable at stage orange and even at stage yellow, now those start to break down, and this really starts to fuck with your mind, and then turquoise starts to emerge. With self-transcendence, with the transcendence of your ego, turquoise starts to emerge. With awareness of Maya, the dream that we are in, when you start to realize that what is happening right here is a game. It's a virtual simulation, it's a dream, it's a hallucination, there's nothing tangible about what's happening right here, or about this body. You start to realize Maya, and Maya in all of its forms, all the ways that the mind deludes us and creates these very solid seeming tangible illusions, but which are just hallucinations. Now you start to realize Maya, and then turquoise starts to emerge. When yellow realizes that the mind and understanding it by itself doesn't bring happiness, and yellow is still frustrated, yellow is still depressed, yellow is still fearful and anxious and still has all these very human problems, yellow suffers a lot. And yellow is fed up with this suffering, and it wants a permanent solution, an existential level solution. Then turquoise starts to emerge. And there's a shift from yellow to turquoise, a shift from learning about stuff to being one merged with the many. Let me give you a list of turquoise values now. Consciousness, perhaps one of the highest values of a turquoise individual. And not just my own consciousness, but also elevating the consciousness of mankind. Because when you're turquoise, you start to understand that consciousness is the key that unlocks and solves all of mankind's problems. You see all the suffering and delusion in the world, and so of course, and because you've raised your own consciousness so much, and maybe you've even awoken, or you've had some glimpses of awakening, now you start to see that this really is the answer, and that what all of mankind is really searching for is more consciousness. Even though they may tell you that what they really want is more sex or more money or a better marriage or to get rid of their depression or they're addicted to drugs or there's some political problem, really, it's just consciousness. What you want is more consciousness. That will solve all of those problems. Turquoise values truth. Truth with a capital T, existential truth, metaphysical truth. Turquoise values deep metaphysical insights. Turquoise values metaphysics, whereas stage orange, for example, might not have, or even stage yellow might not have. Turquoise values wisdom and the wisdom of nature. Wisdom is not just something human beings have, it's inherent to all of reality, because the boundary between human beings and reality starts to break down. Turquoise values mysticism, spirituality, and non-duality. God and divinity. God and divinity at turquoise are very different ideas than they were at blue. At blue, God was some anthropomorphic bearded man in the clouds, which of course is silly, and orange was ridiculing that and fighting against it, which was right in a sense, but also wrong in a sense, because there is such a thing as God, and turquoise actually is starting to now understand what that is through direct consciousness. God is a direct consciousness that you can have, and God is just what you are. This right now, what is happening right now, this right now that you're seeing is God. It's happening, but you're not aware of what it is. You think that you're some animal who's perceiving something. No, you're not. This is God. But you need to recontextualize your present experience to really fully understand the divinity that is occurring right now to which you are asleep. That's what awakening involves. Turquoise values holism, integration, and synthesis versus analysis. The lower stages love to analyze stuff. For turquoise, it's about how do we interconnect everything as much as possible. Because what the realization of God is the realization that everything is infinitely interconnected. And that is the most extraordinary experience and insight that you can have in life, is to realize the infinite interconnectedness of everything. And that you are at the very heart of it all. You're not just some ancillary periphery little creature that was accidentally born after the Big Bang somewhere. No, you are at the very center of it. At the very center of it. You are God. You created this entire thing. And then you just forgot about it. So synthesizing more and more together. Integrating all religions and science. Turquoise values left and right brain synthesis, of course. Turquoise values honesty, transparency, and radical authenticity. Turquoise is not really acting out of a need to please anybody, to manipulate anybody, to present some sort of phony front, or to belong to a part of a group and to conform. Like all of this stuff, turquoise has transcended. Turquoise values being as opposed to knowing, doing, and having, which is what all the lower stages were about. The lower stages were either about having stuff, doing stuff, or knowing stuff. That was yellow, knowing stuff. And turquoise now goes into being. And it's a little difficult to explain the significance of being. Being is a very significant thing. You have to be it to understand what it really is and why it's more powerful than all the other stuff. Because it might seem like, Leo, being, how could being be better than having and doing and knowing? Well, that's just something you have to discover. I can't really communicate it to you. Turquoise values simplicity, flowing with nature, a sort of effortless action. Rather than fighting against nature, it's flowing with nature. At turquoise, your life can become very effortless, very pleasurable as you become this sort of like jujitsu master who is able to jujitsu or aikido all your problems by flowing with nature rather than fighting against them. Turquoise values minimalist, sustainable living, collaborative synergy, human wellness at all levels. Turquoise values healing on every dimension, the physical dimension, the emotional dimension, the spiritual dimension. Turquoise values exploring altered states of consciousness, and there's a lot there to explore. Intuition, channeling, or direct downloads from infinite intelligence, which is amazing. Supernatural degrees of creativity. Really, turquoise is able to become a supernatural visionary. You're able to see connections that mankind, on the whole, will not see or understand for hundreds of more years. So a turquoise visionary can see stuff, can see where technology is going, to see where the human race is going, to see problems that, it's just you're way ahead of your time here. And it's precisely because you're so far ahead of your time that nobody really listens to you or believes you or takes you seriously. Turquoise values spiritual purification, awakening, transcendence, liberation, unconditional love, compassion for all, emotional mastery, presence, mindfulness, paradox, esoteric teachings, gratitude, unity, deeper and deeper levels of interconnectedness, selfless living, sacrificing the self for greater consciousness of the whole, meditation, yoga, contemplation, self-inquiry. Turquoise values not knowing and humility and spontaneity and playfulness and self-amusement. Turquoise tends to be lighthearted because it's the ego that's heavy-hearted. It's the ego that has fears and all these problems that bog it down. So once those are removed, then you're playful and you can laugh, and even when serious problems are happening in the world, you're still playful about it. And Turquoise values the really, really big picture. So Turquoise takes yellow's big picture thinking even bigger. Now, what Turquoise was just modeling, now yellow is actually starting to embody through being. The really big picture starts to be embodied. It becomes tangible and physical and real. Now, let me warn you that it's easy to confuse turquoise with green, so let's help you to make this distinction more clear. Here's the difference. At turquoise, you have real mysticism, whereas at green, you tend to have more new agey, faddish sort of spiritual practices, where you might be part of a spiritual group, you might be going to a yoga class and a little bit of meditation retreats here and there, but it's not serious. You're doing it, but like you're meditating maybe for some health benefit or to calm your mind, to reduce your anxiety. None of this is deep metaphysical meditation. In fact, most people who practice meditation really have no idea what meditation is or how deep it goes. That's because they practice it too casually. At turquoise, you start to have industrial grade levels of meditation and contemplation. Another difference is that turquoise is informed by direct non-dual experiences rather than beliefs or ideas. At green, there's still a lot of spiritual beliefs. Maybe you believe in reincarnation, or you believe in the soul, or you believe in God. That's well and good, but it doesn't matter if you haven't directly experienced that stuff for yourself. Same problem as with blue. Blue believes a lot of stuff. Blue believes in God, but it doesn't matter that you believe in God. It only holds you back because your belief in God is not God. It's the opposite of that. It's idol worship. That's what you're doing at blue. It's an aping. Blue is an aping of turquoise, real mysticism. And blue cannot fathom why that is. Also, turquoise embraces global collectivism without attacking individuality the way that green did. And that's what some of the right-wingers and conservatives and libertarians and orange people, that's the problem they have with green and the social justice warriors. Well, with turquoise, that problem is resolved. The individual is not attacked. Everyone is allowed to sort of be their individual, but how they need to be. But at the same time, there's a recognition of this sort of global collectivism that needs to happen as well. And this happens effortlessly. There's no need to really subjugate people or subjugate yourself. Like blue will oftentimes sacrifice him or herself for the civilization. For turquoise, it's not really a sacrifice. Turquoise is completely surrendering himself. And this is his greatest joy because he wants to live selflessly. So it doesn't come, turquoise doesn't come with this guilt of this kind of Catholic or Orthodox guilt where it's like you have to do this and you have to be a good little boy or a good little girl. Otherwise, you're going to get punished by God. If you don't believe in God, you're going to go to hell. And so there's none of that. At turquoise, it's like the beauty of God is radiating all the time everywhere. So it's so beautiful. It's so amazing that it's the greatest, most sweetest thing you can taste. So you naturally are attracted to it. You don't need anyone to preach to you. You don't need people to tell you to wake up early in the morning on Sunday and go to church. Or, you don't need to flagellate yourself to meditate or any of this kind of stuff. You just start to do it spontaneously. Another difference is that turquoise is conscious of the spiral. And turquoise is often a spiral wizard, able to jump up and down all the different values and look at the world from all these different perspectives that turquoise got from yellow. All of this has been integrated, and this is what a spiral wizard is. Able to communicate with all the different levels of the spiral, able to design solutions for all the different levels without trying to impose one's own values too much, which green tried to do. So that is also a nice improvement over green. Turquoise is not as triggered by injustices, social injustices, the way the green was. There's an acceptance and a deep understanding. The acceptance comes from a deep understanding of intolerance, conflict, war, violence, greed, and evil. Turquoise understands what these things really are at a deep existential level, whereas green didn't really understand these things. Green was just reacting against them. Green was reacting against orange, greed, and materialism, whereas turquoise understands that that's Maya, that's life, that's the spiral, that's how the ego evolves. It can't help itself but to go to war with itself. The ego is always at war with itself and with its neighbors. That's why there's violence. The ego is greedy and acquisitive by its very nature, and it's gross and it's material. So of course it commits all these heinous acts and all these wars and conflicts and injustices and the income inequality in society and intolerance and racism and genocide, all of this stuff. It's a part of God. These are not the work of the devil. These are actually the work of God. But to really understand that, you need to have the direct experiences. And you need to have a deep surrender of your own ego. Because the problem is that you're not going to be able to understand this stuff so long as your own ego, your own agenda is still driving you. Because that's why you have a problem with these things. Not because they're bad inherently. They're not bad at all. It's because they are a threat to you. That's why you're reacting against them. But turquoise is beyond personal threats. Turquoise is much more understanding of stage orange. Doesn't demonize stage orange the way the green does. Turquoise is also not as political as green. Green loves to join its political causes, and sometimes it gets a little too militant and a little too passionate with its political causes, which actually becomes counterproductive. Turquoise doesn't take politics so seriously. Turquoise is more playful about the problems that are going on socially. Although not ignorant of them and not oblivious to them, so a turquoise person is not probably just going to say that, oh, well, the Nazis are coming into town, so let's just let them come over and do whatever they want. No, probably not. I mean, turquoise still has opinions, and turquoise definitely still has a sense of what is right for elevating the consciousness of mankind. And neo-Nazi spreading across the country is not going to elevate the consciousness of mankind. So turquoise is going to be looking out for that. But turquoise also understands the deeper causes of why that's happening, the egoic influences and forces that are at work there. So turquoise will have an easier time actually coming up with solutions than green. Turquoise avoids some of the mob mentality that comes with green. There's an awareness of ego and mindfulness and presence. There's an awareness of ego, and there's more mindfulness, and there's more presence in turquoise than in green. Turquoise tends to have a lot more emotional mastery than green. Turquoise tends to be non-reactive and detached, whereas green was very reactive and very attached. And turquoise is quite effective at solving large problems, whereas green was more about getting together and talking and protesting and stuff, but didn't have as practical solutions. It didn't really have deep systemic solutions for some of the problems. So let's talk about some of the characteristics of turquoise. Let's really flesh this out. Turquoise sees the human race as a single organism. Everything is connected. This is not a metaphor. You actually see the dissolution of the physical boundaries between self and other, such that you can no longer differentiate between your physical body, the universe, and your enemies. That's a hell of a thing. There's a fading of artificial boundaries of ethnicity, skin color, gender, race, nationality, bloodlines, even your species. None of these things start to matter anymore. Your genes, your DNA, none of this stuff matters anymore. A turquoise person, a turquoise teacher will look at all of his pupils as his children, literally. You created them as God. And for orange people, this is completely out of their paradigm, because for orange people, it's like, no, Leo, but evolution, what about DNA? How can you say, I mean, Leo, isn't it so unscientific of you to come up here and to say that other human beings who are not your family, who are not your children or something like that, that they are somehow more or as related to you as your biological genes? Or if you're coming from stage purple or red or blue, then it's all about your bloodline and your nationality and your race and your ethnicity. And you're like, but no, that's my group. All of this is concept. So all of these boundaries that you thought were physical are just conceptual. They break down, even DNA. Even DNA. The reality is that you are as related to your coffee table as you are to your own mother. That's the reality. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that the coffee table has DNA. It's just that DNA is one factor, and it's completely irrelevant when you become conscious enough to see full non-duality in your direct experience. The table you're looking at is actually you. You are the table. Not to mention all the human beings, and you even are your own mother. You gave birth to yourself, by the way. And that's a bit of a mindfuck to discover. Right? So when you start to realize this, all the boundaries start to break down. And so all of these group identities that you thought were important become completely meaningless, very petty and just silly, just utterly silly. Other characteristics of turquoise. Turquoise views the world as interlinked causes and effects in interacting fields of energy. For turquoise, there is joint activity across groups, factions, and communities. Spiritual bonds pull people together. Communities are not just physical, but also conceptual, because the boundary between the physical and the conceptual itself starts to dissolve and to be realized that physical is actually a concept. Physical itself is not physical. Feelings and emotions come back into play, because remember, yellow was a little bit too left-brained and sort of intellectual and academic, and now feelings and the heart comes back in with turquoise. It's warm, whereas yellow is a little cold. With turquoise, work must be meaningful to the overall health of life. There's a deep trust of intuition and instinct. The self is a part of a large conscious spiritual whole. You're not just some little individual human being or human body, the way that you've always thought. Turquoise tends to be non-manipulative, non-ideological, and non-judgmental, which we can't quite say for many of the lower stages. Turquoise is not driven by fear or selfishness. Turquoise doesn't play victim and doesn't play blame games. Turquoise is far beyond green's faddish spirituality. Turquoise has direct experience of oneself as being God. For turquoise, deeper mental and spiritual capacities are awakened. New senses, new abilities that you would think were superhuman now become ordinary and human. There's new control over bodily processes. There's a heightened sensory awareness. Paranormal abilities can develop, or as the yogis call them, siddhis. Healing abilities, telepathy, astral projection, ESP, clairvoyancy, and remote viewing, and stuff of this nature, which seems utterly fantastical and religious and superstitious to stage orange people, even maybe to stage yellow people who are in the materialist paradigm. But this stuff is real, and you can develop these abilities. And really, the mystical becomes the mundane. The paranormal becomes totally normal. This distinction between mystical and material, normal, paranormal, these are all arbitrary conceptual distinctions. All this stuff melts away. And for you, the ability to heal or to have some telepathic insight or something like that, it just becomes like how life always was. There's nothing special about it. It just becomes like physics. And you don't need to work too hard to explain this stuff. It's just something you use in the same way that a logical person uses logic and doesn't ever ask the question, what is logic and where does logic come from? How come I'm able to be logical? What is the explanation for logic? I mean, logic, if you think about it, it is a supernatural ability. That's what logic is. If you're an ant, you don't have logic. You don't have access to logic. And so if you were an ant and you maybe saw someone using logic, that would seem like hocus pocus. How can you use logic to add two numbers together? 1 + 1 = 2? How can you do that? That's what an ant would think, right? That's what it's like from the perspective of an ant. So if you haven't experienced this stuff for yourself, then it's going to seem like that to you. It's going to seem like, no, this stuff is impossible. But that's just because you require direct experience. You require serious spiritual practice to access these things. You don't just access these things, in university or by reading a textbook or watching a YouTube video. You got to work at it. Or some people are born with these supernatural abilities already activated, more so than others. There's a lot of variability. But that's a topic for another day. Turquoise is also characterized by having inspiring levels of emotional mastery. Like when you meet a solid, masterful turquoise person, this person will change your life merely through his presence, merely through the way he carries himself, merely through the way he speaks, merely through the way he looks at you. Like this person can bring you to tears. This person, you can tell that this is something beyond the human, beyond the ordinary capacities of a typical average Joe Schmo. And some of these people are extraordinary. They have superhuman levels of emotional mastery. We're talking about stuff like you can pull this guy's tooth out without Novocaine, and he's going to be happy while you do it. That's the level of emotional mastery that you can get at the highest levels of turquoise. Now, I'm not saying all turquoise people are like this. They can still suffer and experience pain, of course. But there's you also have to understand that within turquoise, there's a lot of range. Like I said, there's 99% of human development is happening in the turquoise stage. So you can understand that there's some people who are going to be just maybe tapping into the early stages of turquoise, who are still going to have weak emotional mastery. And then you're going to have some people in the middle, and then you're going to have some people who are just like really, really high up there, who seem superhuman. Turquoise likes minimalist living, so less is more. Turquoise is definitely ecologically conscious, just like green was. Maybe even more so now. But in a sort of a practical and realistic manner. Orange is characterized by being visionary and being an inspiring leader. Throughout history, these kinds of turquoise leaders have influenced entire movements because it's really, really inspiring, and they can develop a cult-like devotion. They can even be deified because they do exhibit these kinds of godlike qualities. For turquoise, there's a unification of science, technology, medicine, and mysticism. This resolves some of the problems that we had at the lower stages where like maybe blue would not be able to deal with new technological advances or with birth control or with new technology. Sometimes blue would react against that sort of stuff. Or orange would react against certain maybe alternative medicines or healing modalities or certain ideas from psychology or Carl Jung archetypes and the collective unconscious. Or orange materialism would react against that stuff and wouldn't consider it real science or wouldn't consider it valid and try to debunk it. So turquoise overcomes all that nonsense and really integrates the best of science, medicine, mysticism, religion, and technology, all of it together. It all can work seamlessly. And all of it can synergize and help you to raise your consciousness and your understanding of all the interconnections in the world. Everything gets interconnected. All the disciplines get interconnected. Speaking of which, there's a deeper understanding, a really deep understanding and unification of all religions. So a fully fleshed out turquoise person will be able to integrate Zen, Buddhism, Advaita, Christianity, Islam, yoga, Judaism, Hinduism, even atheism, all of that. Turquoise will be able to pick out all the best parts of it, throw away all the junk, all the corruption, all the ego stuff that has corrupted those traditions, and be able to point all the gems out to you, because all of them are really pointing to the same stuff. There's a synthesis of East and West, Western technology with Eastern mysticism. There's an understanding of the fullness of the spiral, and Turquoise uses all the different layers of the spiral proactively and holistically. Turquoise sees everything at once before doing anything specific. For Turquoise, there's a collective imperative, and there's mutual interdependencies that reign supreme. Collective imperatives reign supreme over your individual egoic needs. If Turquoise is engaged in business, which he or she can be, then it's going to be business with soul. A business that probably tries to awaken you in some fashion. And that's more than just being a guru or teaching people. There's hundreds, thousands of different ways that you could awaken people, to help awaken people. It's not just about being a guru or a meditation teacher. Think much more broadly than that. For Turquoise, there's a sense of a greater community built around spiritual embodiment. If you want to think in terms of the chakra system, then Turquoise is the 6th and the 7th chakra, so the third eye and the crown chakra. Turquoise action comes from selfless love and an open heart. Turquoise has a great mental and behavioral flexibility. Very, very flexible. All the dogma and rigidity of the mind that used to be there is now gone. For Turquoise, sexual desire is transmuted into metaphysical love. Now, that's not always the case, but for really exceptional Turquoise people, that is what's going to start to happen. As you move away from the lower chakras, you outgrow them, you transcend them, you realize that the pleasures, the sexual pleasures, the other carnal, low-level materialistic pleasures you had for money, for domination, for power, for food, for drugs, these things all just become so insignificant compared to the higher level joys of metaphysical love or mystical union or deep insights or helping people to awaken. That becomes so much more pleasurable that you just don't have time for the other stuff and you let it go. You don't let it go in a sense of like the way that Blue did it, whereas Blue had to really force himself to deny sex and to deny certain sins and wickedness and certain carnal temptations. No, for Turquoise, this is effortless. Like I said, Blue is an aping of Turquoise. So Turquoise thinks that it will get to, Blue thinks that it will get to Turquoise by aping Turquoise. But in fact, all that does is that just mires Blue really deeply into dogma and ideology and into all sorts of neurotic, bad shadow, like hidden guilt and stuff, hiding skeletons in your closet. Because what really needs to happen to overcome that, you need to go through spiritual purification, purify yourself so much, have the direct experiences to such an extent that they purify you that now you naturally overcome those things rather than trying to do it through will or through belief. Turquoise is excellent at dealing with paradox. Turquoise people tend to be very wise, and also they tend to teach in unorthodox styles. Gurus are known for that. Turquoise is post-rational and post-material. Turquoise connects to being rather than quantifying or categorizing the world. That enterprise is over. It's way too limited. Turquoise is nonlinear, is human-centered, has a supernatural intuition, has an ability to connect to source, tends to have high integrity, and is able to actually follow through on that integrity. Because for Blue, again, Blue is turned on by integrity, but for Blue, integrity is more of an image, or it's more of a front or a facade, because Blue is not developed and mature enough, and the mind is not open enough to really, truly be able to open up to truth and therefore embody integrity. That's one of the things that makes turquoise people such great leaders and such visionaries and so inspiring, is because they have that integrity and you can see it, and they are walking their talk. And that's a rare thing to see in the world, where most people are faking it, or they're putting on fronts, or they're trying to appear better than they really are, and they're mostly inauthentic. For turquoise, the universe is both impersonal and deeply personal. And that's a paradox. That's one of the paradoxes that they resolve. In a sense, the universe doesn't care about you at all. In that sense, it's impersonal. On the other hand, the universe is you. You literally are the universe. It's the most personal thing possible. So it's really something you got to experience to understand. Turquoise is conscious of the miracle of life. Everything becomes mystical and amazing and magical. Nothing is just, oh, it's mundane. Oh, that's just some material stuff. No, it's like everything is amazing. You could spend an hour just looking at a toothbrush or at a coffee cup because it's such an amazing object. It's a miracle that it exists at all, and you're conscious of it. Orange has a constant attention to ever-expanding implications of everything. Turquoise is even a deeper systems thinker than yellow was. Systems now are not just mechanical things, they are alive, they are imbued with intelligence. Intelligence is not something that human beings possess, the way that orange arrogantly believes. Intelligence is permeated through the entire universe. Every aspect of being is intelligent. The entire arrangement of the universe is infinite intelligence at work. For turquoise, life consists of fractals. You can see all the interconnections and the fractal nature of everything. You can see the macro or the micro right through to the macro. Turquoise stands in awe at the cosmic order, from quarks to cells to human beings and trees and cars and all the way up to galaxies and the Big Bang. All of it is awesome. All of it is a miracle. All of it is magical. All of it is amazing. All of it interconnects with everything else, the micro through the macro, in a fractal manner. For turquoise, reality can be experienced but never truly known. Reality is fundamentally, irreducibly mysterious and mystical. There's a disillusion of the ego. For turquoise, there's this interesting paradox that, on the one hand, life is the most important thing there is, and yet on the other hand, my own life is completely unimportant. My own death doesn't matter. Turquoise can detect the harmonic forces which govern organizations, which makes turquoise good at leading and running organizations. Turquoise is good at leading by example, setting a good example, being a role model that other people aspire to be. That's exactly what you need in a great leader. Turquoise is a movement away from the gross, materialism, from gross stuff to subtle stuff. Turquoise develops the capacity to sense the subtle aspects of reality. Of course, if you're orange, you're asking, Leo, what subtle aspects of reality? There are no subtle aspects of reality, right? That's why you're orange. You haven't become conscious of them yet. Turquoise going from the external to the internal. There's a transcendence of morality, meaning, judgment, life and death, duality, mind, reason, science, and good and evil. All of this is transcended. And turquoise is finally able to have really deep, honest, meaningful relationships and communication beyond the shallow and petty clinginess and neediness and materialism that came with orange and even with green and even with yellow. The reason human beings have such fucked up relationships, and especially intimate romantic relationships, is because our relationships are mostly just about satisfying our own needs, gross materialistic needs, and they're all about manipulation. And this just is not sustainable. That's why most relationships end. Turquoise is now relating from a very different place, from a non-needy place, from a much more honest place. these types of relationships, these are like next level. These are like superhuman relationships. You don't know, as an orange person, as a green person, you don't really know what a true relationship is. You don't know what a true communication face to face with a human being is, because you're so wrapped up in your own ego. And you're so unconscious of the dynamics that the ego is playing and how it's distorting your ability to relate to other people and to communicate honestly with other people. And that's a whole can of worms. It's a very deep topic to talk about, which we'll cover in separate episodes in the future. Relationships and communication. So let's now give you a list of examples of turquoise. First and foremost, I think Sadhguru is a very good example of turquoise. And in a sense, you might say he's beyond turquoise. I mean, Sadhguru is a very advanced individual, but I think he embodies a lot of the ideas of turquoise community building in particular. Because there's a lot of gurus and enlightened masters out there, but Sadhguru is building a pretty massive and incredible organization. And the way he's running this organization, I think, is also very eye-opening and inspiring, and there's a lot to learn from that. The way he's running the Isha Foundation and all the work that they're doing, I think it's really an example. So he's an example of someone who not only just kind of worked on himself and developed himself, but also really now he's showing the world how to do it, and he's building an organization for that purpose, which is quite amazing. If you go and you visit one of these turquoise communities or turquoise organizations, you'll be blown away. It's really a life-changing experience to visit one of these organizations. Not just Sadhgurus. I mean, there's dozens of these kinds of organizations that exist that you can discover. I've been to one. It's a life-changing experience because you see how mankind was sort of meant to live. Not the way we live in our cities and our suburbs and all this very orange way of relating with each other. We're all disconnected and we're competing and fighting with each other in this sort of zero-sum game libertarian mentality. It's just that whole paradigm becomes so dysfunctional once you see how human beings can really work at the turquoise level. Like it's really inspiring, and it's difficult to communicate and to relate to exactly what that is. You have to kind of see it for yourself. And that's something that's also beyond just enlightenment. People sometimes say, oh, Leo, but enlightenment's all there is. So what else is there? Nothing else matters. No, there's a lot more. Because even if every human being in the world is enlightened, there's still the issue of how do we live together? How do we organize ourselves? How do we organize our cities, our communities, our education system? So there's a lot of sort of higher level governmental and political issues. But of course, now we're not talking about politics at the Republican Democrat level or at the conservative and liberal level. We're way, way, way beyond that here. Another turquoise example I have for you is Shunyamurti. He's a yogi, Western yogi from Costa Rica. And he has a pretty amazing community there that he's building. It's small, but pretty inspiring. And he's a really good example of turquoise as he integrates all the different religious teachings, all the scientific teachings, just like everything integrated together. Like it's an incredible degree of integration and holism. Thomas Campbell, Yoda. Yoda's a little kind of a interesting fictional example for you. You don't really see Yoda in the first Star Wars trilogy being very social because he kind of just became a hermit. But in the prequel trilogy, you do actually see Yoda sort of teaching the younglings and the Padawans and all that. So in that sense, he was part of the council and he was doing more social organization type of stuff there. So there's some examples of him being kind of like globalist, community-minded there, as well as mystical. David Hawkins, Ken Wilber is a great example of turquoise. Shinzen Young, Deepak Chopra. A lot of orange people like to rip on Deepak Chopra. That's just because they don't really understand what Deepak Chopra is talking about. It doesn't make sense from the materialist paradigm. But it does once you get higher. Stan Grof is a great example, I think, of someone who's sort of like high yellow, early turquoise. Osho. Now, Osho's a little bit of a controversial example because people will watch that Osho documentary on Netflix and they'll say, oh, Leo, but look at all the shenanigans and evil stuff and all the manipulative stuff that happened in Osho's community. You have to distinguish Osho from his community. And also you have to understand that Turquoise isn't perfect. Just because you're Turquoise doesn't mean you're going to build the perfect community that's flawless and doesn't have its problems. There are still problems. There can still be mistakes. There can still be corruptions, especially if the leader is so far out there like Osho that he doesn't take really a direct kind of like daily involvement in the running of the organization. So the organization they set up, in many ways, it was an amazing organization, but it was unsustainable because Osho made some mistakes because really he was spending most of his time, from what I understand, just meditating and blissing out in non-dual infinite consciousness and wasn't really running that organization. That organization became so massive that it really needed his oversight. And also, I think he has some shadow elements that he didn't fully work through. So remember, you can be Turquoise, but still have some lingering problems. You might have some shadow stuff from orange left over, or from blue even, or from green, and so that can sabotage your work. Muji is also an example of Turquoise. Ramaji, Rupert Spira, Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth, Yogananda, Martin Ball, Terence McKenna, Carl Jung. Terence McKenna and Carl Jung, I think they were kind of on the edge there, yellow/turquoise-ish. They weren't like, I wouldn't consider them super solid turquoise. Sri Aurobindo, him I would consider quite solid turquoise. Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, Irvin Laszlo, David Loy, Alan Watts, Wim Hof, Matt Kahn, the Dalai Lama, Sasha Shulgin. I also consider him sort of high yellow, early turquoise, not solid turquoise. Yoga, holotropic breath work, the book, The Holographic Universe, is a very turquoise sort of book. The Akashic Records, the Noosphere, opening the third eye, the pineal gland, out-of-body experiences, samadhi experiences, cities, paranormal abilities, clairvoyance, channels, mediums like Bashar, some of the stuff that Aleister Crowley was doing, Rudolf Steiner, some of these sorts of occultist type figures. Occultists are a little bit tricky to kind of pin down on the spiral dynamics model. I'm not sure if we should call them solid turquoise, but they definitely exhibit some turquoise elements, simply because they do. If you're doing occult stuff, you are having those mystical experiences, which it might not be full non-duality, but still you're tapping into something transcendent, which is shaping your value system significantly. Alternative healing systems, the notion of Maya, psychedelics, are all examples of turquoise. 5-MeO-DMT is the most turquoise of psychedelics. And if you really want just a complete blast into turquoise, and you want to awaken to turquoise in a very radical manner, at least for an hour or two, or for a day or two, then go do some 5-MeO-DMT. That will totally open you up. You will start to see that this stuff that I'm talking about here is not just utopian fantasies and wishful thinking and superstition, but that it's very real. It's very real. From Star Trek, the Q race. The Q were these almost supernatural, godlike people who were able to like jump back and forward in time and do all this kind of mystical, supernatural sort of stuff. Now, I'm not saying you're going to become like that. They were a little overpowered, I think, in the Star Trek universe, but that's a little bit of a flavor of turquoise there. Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenetic fields are a turquoise concept. Dean Radin's paranormal research. Gandhi's ideas of pluralistic harmony. The notion of Gaia, Earth as a living system, is a turquoise idea. Biocentrism, the Monroe Institute, the Esalen Institute has shades of turquoise. Transpersonal psychology as an entire field. Jung's collective unconscious and various kinds of archetypes. Quantum field theory is starting to kind of show the interconnectedness and the nonlinear, infinite nothingness that everything is. That's what quantum field theory is sort of pointing to, although many quantum field theorists don't really realize it yet. because they're still at yellow or even orange. Sacred geometry, reincarnation, opening chakras. Saints, sages, mystics, and prophets. So that's my list of turquoise. You can add more to that list. Now, a couple of words about saints, sages, mystics, and prophets. This is a little bit tricky because you see, we're starting to reach the limits of spiral dynamics as a model. Remember, spiral dynamics is a model, and spiral dynamics is really not designed to model non-duality or mysticism. So if you start to notice discrepancies about how to categorize certain mystics and sages and saints and prophets, especially ancient ones like the Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, and Moses, you might ask, Leo, are these purple, or are these turquoise individuals? Well, I hesitate to say that because what spiral dynamics is talking about is talking about the evolution of human culture. Cultural memes that infect your brain. This is cultural programming. We're not directly talking about non-duality or spirituality. So there is a loose correlation. It's true that as you ascend up the spiral stages, generally you're less egoic, more transcendent of the self, and you have more chances of experiencing mystical experiences and non-duality. But it's not a perfect correlation. And in a sense, the Buddha and Jesus and Muhammad and Moses, these were outliers. These were like 1 in a million, maybe 1 in a billion people. And that's not what spiral dynamics is tracking. Spiral dynamics is not tracking the anomalies, which are what these people were. It's tracking general trends within human cultural evolution. So you shouldn't be surprised if spiral dynamics can't fully account for Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad. In a sense, these people were mystics and they had probably very deep existential insights, and maybe they were enlightened, maybe even fully enlightened. Who really knows? But also, in another sense, you have to understand that the cultural memes and programming they had was generally very primitive, even though they themselves might have been enlightened. Famously, the Buddha didn't want to let, for example, women become enlightened or become nuns and practice his form of meditation and self-inquiry. Later, he was convinced by his followers to actually open up the practices to women, and he did. And then you got Buddhist female monks. But originally, the Buddha was closed-minded to that. Why was that? You would think that, if Buddha was turquoise, Leo, he should have been a feminist and he should have been open to all human rights and all this. No, you got to understand that they were living in a context that was extremely different. We're talking about 2,500 years ago. You cannot even fathom how culture has changed in 2,500 years. If we're talking about Buddha or Jesus or Muhammad or Moses, these people lived in totally different times when the world was not interconnected. There was no science. There was hardly any serious philosophy back then. There was no business back. There was trade, but you didn't have corporations. You didn't have legal systems and laws. You barely had writing back then. This was a totally different reality. It wasn't just like the Buddha and Jesus was like a modern feminist, but minus the smartphone and minus the car, the Tesla car, and minus the computer programming job or something. It's not like that. It was totally different. The view of the world was very different. There was no materialist paradigm back then. Try to imagine this, that people were alive. They didn't know what life was. It was very mystical and deeply mysterious. In a certain sense, that made it much easier to have mystical experiences than today. Because today, you're born, you go through 12 years of schooling, you go to university, your mind is completely locked into the materialist paradigm, and you have no chance of stumbling upon mysticism unless, just through fluke luck. And you need radical open-mindedness and a lot of work to get there. In a certain sense, it was easier back then. Of course, in a certain sense, it was harder back then because you didn't really have books, you didn't have the internet, you didn't have YouTube, you didn't have actualize.org, you didn't have any of this stuff. And you didn't have any precedents. Today, if you become enlightened, you can just kind of go on Google and look up what happened to me? And then Google will give you the answer. And you're like, oh yeah, that's enlightenment. But back then, 2,500 years ago, you became enlightened. You're like, what the fuck is this? I don't know what the fuck this is. And no one can tell me. Or if they did, they're going to tell me in their tradition. There was no multiculturalism. There was no globalism back then. You didn't even know, most people didn't even know they were living on a planet, or that there were other continents or countries or cultures or any of this sort of stuff, right? So that limited one's worldview extremely, even if one was deeply enlightened. So just keep all that in mind. Which is why sometimes some of these ancient prophets or mystics might have been fairly violent, or might have participated in what today we would consider like cruel or evil or unjust behavior. People like to rag on Muhammad, for example. They say, "Oh, Muhammad was such a villain because he would fight and butcher them and murder neighboring tribes and go to war with neighboring tribes and blah blah blah, and he would have sex with young women and this and that." Like, I mean, this is completely absurd. You're judging a man from 1,600 years ago by American, Western European democratic standards today, as if there was like anti-slavery movements and feminist movements and civil rights movements back then. There wasn't. When you're talking about ancient Arabia, this was like pre-medieval Arabia, where people were slitting each other's throats on a daily basis, tribal warfare all the time. These people were at stage turquoise purple and red, a very primitive culture. Very violent, very brutal. Disease and death and hunger and plague. Like, I mean, you got to really put yourself into the shoes of these people. So if Muhammad marries a 12-year-old girl and you're like, "Oh, but that's evil." No, it's because morality and culture is completely relative. So it's evil to your standards. It wasn't evil to their standards back then. In fact, from what I heard about Muhammad is that actually he was actually very magnanimous, in the sense that one of the wives that he married was supposedly kind of quite old, and he didn't have to marry her, but because her husband died, back in that Arabian culture, like if a woman lost her husband and she was a little bit older, she became a widow, she sort of became an untouchable. Like she couldn't work, she couldn't feed herself, like she would literally starve to death, because women weren't allowed to do anything in those cultures back then. They were like property, and they were just there to serve the husband. When the husband died and all the brothers died and there's no man in the family, that's it. The woman was basically on the street. She was going to starve to death. That's how it would work back then. And so Muhammad married her just because he had the compassion to take her in, because he knew that she would starve to death. And then supposedly they stayed married for a long time. I don't know if any of this stuff's true. The problem is that we're talking about stuff that's ancient history. You don't really know. So don't take that stuff too seriously. People get caught up on these things like, "Oh, how many wives did Muhammad have? Or did the Buddha do this or that? Like, what kind of haircut did he have? Or like, was Jesus married or unmarried?" As though this is relevant in any way. Like, it doesn't matter. These are all irrelevancies as far as I'm concerned. So just, keep all that in mind. All right, let's take a quick intermission here. I need a quick break, and I'll be right back with more. All right, here's some stats on turquoise. Less than 0.01% of the global population is at turquoise. So like I said, very, very rare. And turquoise has less than 1% of total world influence or power. What's the style of government like under turquoise? Well, because turquoise is so rare, we don't really have any examples of turquoise governments just yet. What we have is some turquoise communities which exist around the world. They're quite small. So what turquoise governments will really look like to actually have a major European government or American government turn turquoise, we're so far away from that. We might be 50 or 100 or more years away. So we don't know what that'll exactly look like, but based on what we see in these small communities, it would look something like this. The style of government for turquoise is a holistic organism. Micromanagement of all life forms towards common good in response to macro problems. What life needs supersedes any special, natural, ethnic, or ideological groupings. So it's very globalist. The purpose of this community or this society is to elevate the consciousness of all of mankind. So you might try to imagine what that would actually look like if we flesh that out, and if you had a huge government doing that. Think of how different the American government is or the European government is from that today. How much it's not about the advancement and elevation of the consciousness of mankind. The word consciousness isn't even used in political discussions or in governmental discussions. Like, that word isn't even used. So it'll probably take us a good 50 to 100 years just for mainstream politicians to even start using that word, which shows you how far away we really are. Because one of the reasons is because our education system is so poor that really our education system indoctrinates people. And I'm not just talking about first through 12th grade. I'm also talking about universities and academia. Indoctrinates people into materialism. So the word consciousness doesn't really register. There's almost a complete ignorance of psychology and consciousness in human affairs. And yet those are the two most important factors in all human affairs, is psychology and consciousness. And we know these two things so poorly in our culture, in our pop culture, very poorly. Let me talk a little bit about spiral dynamics versus non-duality. Like I said already in my conversation about the different types of mystics and how you have to be careful with modeling mystics, spiral dynamics is not a model of different levels of consciousness per se. It's about cultural memes. And even though generally speaking we can say that stage yellow has more consciousness, let's say, than stage blue, and stage blue has more consciousness than stage red, and so forth, especially when you start getting into conversations about mysticism and non-duality, spiral dynamics is going to start to break down. And you got to be careful not to confuse spiral dynamics stage turquoise with strict non-duality. Because these are different things. You could be in a non-dual state, but not be turquoise. There are many, I would assume, mystics in existence, for example, in India today, who are very awakened or awoken or enlightened, but their level of sophistication and the cultural memes that they're programmed with are still largely stage blue, Hinduism, or maybe orange, or maybe even some version of purple. You know, purple tribal people can have various mystical insights and wisdom, but that doesn't mean they have the sophistication of turquoise, because the sophistication of turquoise includes stages orange and green and yellow, and especially yellow is a very complex and nuanced stage, which you're not going to get just by sitting on a meditation cushion in a cave for 20 years. You can become enlightened that way, but you're not going to get the sophistication that you get with yellow, for example, from study, from reading books, from learning about science, and interacting with multiple cultures and studying politics, right? So spiral dynamics is not just about becoming enlightened. In fact, it's really not about that at all. Enlightenment is a separate, might almost say, independent variable from what's going on with spiral dynamics. Spiral dynamics is more about how culture is becoming more complicated and more sophisticated and dealing with more complicated problems. And this really has to do with the fact that a culture and a society is a large thing. It's not something that just happens for one individual or even for a small tribe of 100 individuals. When we're talking about a major government, like the US government or some European or Asian government, we're talking about a government that deals with hundreds of millions of people. So you need the infrastructure, you need the education systems, the university systems, the level that science is at, whatever is happening in the churches and the religious groups, the political parties, the ideologies there, the economic system, like all of this is a part of what spiral dynamics is trying to model and understand. And that is very sophisticated and complex stuff. You can't just reduce that down to something like non-duality or enlightenment. Which is not to say that one is more important than the other. It's just that, different models are useful for different purposes. You wouldn't use Einstein's models of gravity to talk about economics, right? You'd use an economic model. And likewise, you shouldn't use spiral dynamics if you're talking about strict non-duality and various mystical altered states of consciousness. Well, then you're going to want to find some other model, and there do exist other models, and I'll talk in the future about different models that specifically have to do with levels of consciousness, altered states of consciousness, and this sort of stuff. You can find this in various mystical traditions, including Buddhism and Christianity and other places like that. All right, so just keep that in mind. Don't confuse turquoise with non-duality. Just because someone is enlightened doesn't necessarily mean that they're turquoise. And just because someone is turquoise certainly doesn't mean that they're enlightened. It's possible, for example, to have a few mystical experiences, or maybe take some psychedelics, and you will evolve, and your notion and understanding of the world might become complex and sophisticated enough to the point where you are starting to tap into turquoise, but you're still not enlightened. So just keep that in mind. Here are some sayings and slogans for turquoise. Everything is one. We are all God. You are already enlightened. Everything is perfect, and at the same time, everything is evolving. To see a world in a grain of sand and heaven in a wildflower. The kingdom of heaven is within. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. I am that. And life is a dream. What triggers turquoise? Well, not that much. Because by this point, you have evolved through so many stages that you've really worked on this non-judgmentalism idea, and you've worked a lot on detachment. And so turquoise is quite understanding of how Maya works, how ignorance works. And that's where triggering basically comes from. And turquoise also usually has a fairly robust degree of emotional maturity and mastery, which helps to take the edge off a lot of stuff. So not that much is going to trigger turquoise, but still little things can get to him. For example, the insanity of the world. When you're at very high levels of consciousness, you look around the world, you see just how ignorant and unconscious everybody is around you. They are like zombies, like robots, walking around, having sex, doing drugs, making money, making all sorts of chaos within politics and governments and wars, and just, it's insanity. And remember how I told you that every stage looks at other stages as though they were insane, at least some of them? Well, turquoise looks down at all the other stages, and although it doesn't do it in a judgmental manner, but it sees the insanity of the world, especially the lower stages. It sees how unsustainable all of these actions are, and that when we have a global population of 7 or 8 or 10 billion people, like we're going to have pretty soon, this stuff is just not going to be sustainable. And turquoise is very conscious of this. Now, that doesn't mean turquoise is freaking out about it. It doesn't even mean that turquoise is depressed about it or is angry about it or bitter or judgmental. Turquoise certainly shouldn't be looking down and blaming people for this, because turquoise understands that this is just part of infinity, part of how the whole design works. And turquoise actually can see the beauty in it and can see the logic and wisdom of it, which lower stages cannot fathom. But still, this insanity sometimes, it can trigger you because, people can be downright disgusting and really unconscious of the stuff that they do. Turquoise can be triggered by the status quo. It's very frustrating that our government and our politics and our economics are still at such a low level of development. Turquoise can be triggered by myopia, the limited vision that people can have. A turquoise person can create a course or a video or offer all this wisdom. Turquoise people are repositories of this incredible wisdom that can transform how all of mankind works and sees the world and can increase your levels of happiness tenfold, 100-fold. And yet, nobody really is able to fathom what Turquoise has to offer because people are so myopic. And organizations are myopic, businesses are myopic, governments are myopic. So that can be frustrating for Turquoise. Materialistic corruption can be frustrating. Profits over truth and spirit. Profits over heart. Dogmatic scientism and rationalism, when people get so set on science, trying to quantify everything, prove everything, and then a Turquoise person's trying to explain something, some profound insight, and then this kind of simple-minded Sam Harris fanboy asks for a Turquoise person, oh, quantify that, quantify God, or quantify intuition, or quantify some spiritual non-dual experience, quantify love, quantify healing, quantify paranormal abilities, and this stuff cannot be quantified. So it's not a problem that it can't be quantified. It's just you have to use a different method to get there. But of course, these dogmatic scientistic type people don't get it. They don't get post-rationalism. They think that the only way to know about the world is through rationality and through logic. And go try to convince them otherwise. You can't, because it's a religion. It's a dogma. Turquoise can be triggered by ecological dysfunction, which is happening all around us, by the collective suffering of mankind. All of mankind's suffering is largely self-inflicted. And Turquoise knows this. Lower stages don't really understand this yet. So in a sense, that the tragedy of it hasn't hit you yet. When you get to Turquoise, you're gonna feel tragedy for all of mankind, because you see how, oh my God, we're so close, and it's just like we just need a few simple changes in our education system, in our government, in our economic system, and then millions and millions and billions of people will start to awaken. So it's like we're so close, and yet we're so far. And that can be frustrating. And Turquoise can just be triggered by little petty mundane affairs. It might surprise you that some advanced yogi or some enlightened master, he can have the whole world sort of figured out. And at the same time, just something very small could irritate him. Some little mundane thing, just the fact that you have to go pay your taxes and fill out some forms, and just, maybe some legal dispute, something petty like that. Because generally Turquoise is looking at these much loftier ideas, wrestling with complicated and important truths about the nature of reality and how to organize society and all this. But the fact is that there's a lot of petty, mundane stuff, survival stuff, that still creeps in, and you still got to take care of it. Now, of course, a very sophisticated and mature Turquoise person will have mastered that, but especially someone who's early into Turquoise might still suffer from those problems. I know that I do. Limitations of Turquoise. So this is the section where I talk about the unhealthy manifestations of Turquoise. Now, again, Turquoise is so sophisticated that it doesn't tend to be super unhealthy the way that the lower stages were, but still, there is stuff here that can be problematic. For example, Turquoise can become too mystical and too spiritual, to the point where they become unconcerned with earthly problems, where they can just go off and retreat into a cave and just live there all by themselves, sort of like a hermit. Now you might wonder, does a person who does that, who kind of retreats from society, does that person can he even be called Turquoise anymore? Because Turquoise is supposed to be collectivist, and this guy seems like he's just off on his own. Again, I would say this is sort of where the model breaks down. And also, you can have a very sophisticated person who understands all of these complicated global problems and knows how to deal with them, but then ultimately he becomes so conscious that it really doesn't matter. Because when you understand that it's all just a dream, then what does it really matter? Society is evolving. The world is perfect as it is. Nothing really needs to be fixed. Human suffering has always existed. It will always exist. People will always be ignorant. There's really no end to evolution. So what's the big deal? Let things unfold naturally. trust that societies will get to where they need to get to, and all the problems that there are will be worked out over time. Will people suffer? Of course they will, but that's always been the case, and that will always be the case. So what can you do about it? So with this sort of idea, Turquoise can retreat and withdraw. And of course, there's no problem with this per se. No one is telling you that you have to become socially active and build a community and do the whole Sadhguru thing and become a bodhisattva and enlighten the whole world. You don't have to do that. If you don't want to, you can just go and live the rest of your life in a cave somewhere, no problem. Or you can just like go run a business. So there's various possibilities here on the spectrum. Don't think that you either have to be a hermit or you have to be a bodhisattva and nothing in between. No, you can just be an ordinary person. I've met turquoise level people who just like have a family and just like go do a normal 9-to-5 job, take care of business, and just live a pretty normal life. There's plenty of people like that as well. So you don't have to be some visionary Gandhi leader to be turquoise. Another problem with turquoise can be that they sort of live in their own reality. They're so advanced that it's hard for other people to understand them. They can teach very advanced things in ways that are difficult to relate to for average folk. And therefore, these turquoise people can be misunderstood, or their teachings can just kind of fly over people's heads. And one of the problems for turquoise is that turquoise has to think back and remember what it was like before all this evolution that happened, before the awakenings, before the non-dual experience, back when they were deeply rooted in the ego and in Maya and all this nonsense, chasing after sex. And turquoise has to think back to that and has to then try to speak to people at that sort of level. They have to be practical. Some of turquoise's teachings can be a little bit too direct and too simple, such that, like, for example, turquoise can say, well, you're already enlightened. And then the student is like, well, enlightened, well, but I don't feel enlightened. Well, is it true that you're already enlightened? Well, look, from a certain perspective, that's true. But from another perspective, it's not true. You have to go through the path and you have to actually awaken. So, these sorts of simplistic, overly mysterious, overly kind of unorthodox and paradoxical teachings, sometimes turquoise teachings will be very short and kind of not something that an ordinary person can latch onto. That's one of the things that I do with actualize.org. I think that's a little bit different, is I work really hard to try to take these advanced ideas and kind of bring them down to the level where ordinary people who are still at stage orange or green or yellow can understand this stuff. There are a lot of really advanced teachers out there who you don't know about and you will never know about because they don't bother to dumb down their teachings or to mainstream this stuff. Because frankly, at that level, you probably don't care anymore to mainstream your stuff and to boil it down. So there's a trade-off there. And the problem with that is that if you really want to awaken lots of people, you do need to find a way to make it accessible to them. Another limitation of turquoise is that they can develop a sort of guru complex, whether they're doing it out of some kind of spiritual ego, or even if they don't intentionally want to do it. They may even, not like the idea of being a guru, but nevertheless, a sort of cult organization can form around them, especially if they're very advanced, and then people can start to worship them and just kind of believe them and sort of create a religion around this person, even if the person doesn't want it. But then, of course, some turquoise people will still kind of feed off of that. And of course, it does sort of feed your spiritual ego, and it feels nice to have all these people doing stuff for you, building your community for you. And maybe they give you donations and money. Maybe they give you sex and love. Maybe they cook you your food, so then you kind of get dependent on that. And that can become a problem. It can go to the guru's head, and it can also go to all the followers' heads. And then that can lead to corruption and all sorts of pretty nasty and low consciousness stuff. So even though the guru can be an enlightened master, still a lot of unconscious stuff can happen around him. And don't think that just because a guru is an enlightened master and he has transcended the ego, that he still can't be seduced by all the sort of pleasantries and materialistic stuff that comes from teaching people. Like teaching people, helping people to awaken is very rewarding. So you help 100 people awaken, those people will be very thankful to you. And they will shower you with love and with gifts and with sex and with opportunities, business opportunities, social opportunity, all this sort of stuff. And so as a guru, you have to be very careful about that because it's very easy to kind of just get sucked into it. And just because you're enlightened, don't think that you can't get tempted, especially when the temptations are very strong. Especially if your enlightenment is not very deep and you haven't really worked out all the kinks in your shadow and you haven't worked out and fully mastered all the lower stages yet. Maybe you still have some cravings. Maybe there's some sexual stuff still that you haven't gotten over. And so then you can get tempted. And that's how you can get some of these gurus who otherwise are quite enlightened and they have some deep mystical insights, but still corruption happens. And then their communities become these sorts of negative examples of how spirituality goes wrong. That's where you hear stories about gurus abusing their students and exploiting people and that sort of stuff. That's usually because the guru isn't fully matured, isn't fully developed, still has deeper levels of non-duality to get to, still has a lot of work to do on emotional mastery. That stuff does not happen with one experience. That takes decades of work to really round yourself out as a teacher and as a guru. Other limitations of Turquoise is that life can become sort of meaningless, like you're just in a video game or in a dream. Turquoise can deny the importance of political issues. Turquoise can assume that other people are just as capable of awakening as they are, without realizing, and I've noticed this about a lot of gurus, is that most gurus who are deeply enlightened, they have some supernatural talent for that work. They have some supernatural focusing abilities, hardcore discipline ability. These are just like talents and strengths that these gurus have. Maybe they were born with exceptional degrees of consciousness. Maybe it's the way their brain is structured or whatever that just makes it easier for them to do this stuff, makes it easier for them to sit for hundreds or thousands of hours on the cushion, contemplating, meditating, inquiring, and so forth, which is just harder for the average person. And so it's sort of like, if you're an ordinary weightlifter and you're trying to emulate Arnold Schwarzenegger. Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger was not just your average guy off the street doing weightlifting. Arnold Schwarzenegger was a gifted, both genetically and psychologically and whatever else. He had all the stuff that you need to succeed in that career and in that sport. So I think it's like that for spirituality as well. Many spiritual masters report having profound spiritual experiences when they were just like 6 years old or 10 years old, spontaneous Kundalini awakenings and paranormal powers and this sorts of stuff. Of course, they had to do a lot of work as well, so don't think that they didn't work their ass off. Many of them worked more than you could possibly imagine, but still, they weren't like your average person. And so because of this, they can just assume that, it's easy. It's like, just sit down and meditate for 1,000 hours. It's like, just sit down and do this yoga, or just sit down and you'll have these powers. But it's like, no, for most people, it doesn't work that way. Another problem for Turquoise is that there can be community division on a grand scale. So Turquoise can develop into sort of mega tribes. In a sense, Turquoise kind of is a mirror or a parallel to Purple. And Purple was the very tribal stage that I didn't even talk about yet. And so Purple was very tribal, tribes of 100 people or so. But Turquoise now is also tribal, but now it's this much more enlightened tribalism, you might call it. It's not really tribalism, but still you can develop these mega mega tribes of turquoise, and then there can be conflict and division between these turquoise mega tribes. Turquoise can become stuck on shallow levels of enlightenment or non-duality. There's many degrees to awakening. Just because you have two gurus does not mean they're at the same level, not even at all. Some gurus will have 10 or 100 times more consciousness and real depth of understanding than other ones. And so the danger with turquoise is that as you do start to experience some of these mystical states, you might get to a point where you experience some amazing awakening experience, and then you're like, yes, that's it. That's the end. I've got it. Now I'm enlightened. And what you don't realize is that actually there's deeper levels. And so this can become a pretty big trap. Non-duality wars is something I've also noticed with gurus. Certain gurus like to criticize other gurus from different traditions. And this comes from usually from a lack of really familiarity with the other tradition. And so they will criticize one teaching or another teacher and sort of go back and forth and get into these debates about who's more enlightened and what enlightenment really means and other various kind of technical minutia details of spirituality. And then ultimately you've got Mahasamadhi as a possible limitation to turquoise. So you might get so awakened, so enlightened that you just actually leave your body. There are some stories of that. Now, I don't know if that's true. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't personally have experience with it, of course. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here speaking to you. So I do believe it's probably possible. I wouldn't worry about it, though. Some people, when they hear about this Mahasamadhi, leaving your body, getting so enlightened you leave your body, I wouldn't worry about it, because you have to understand, with Mahasamadhi, it means that you consciously leave your body. It's not something that happens to you by accident, like I'm sitting on my meditation cushion and then all of a sudden I left my body and now I'm dead. It doesn't work that way. It's like, no, if you're going to do that, that means you're consciously choosing to terminate your life, to become infinite or whatever, forever, to leave this reality. And if you do that, that's going to be a highly conscious thing. That's not something that's going to just happen to you by accident from sitting in a Vipassana, in a 10-day Vipassana retreat. That's not going to happen. So forget about it. You know, you're decades away from that problem. Now, I want to give you a warning about this tendency to over-idealize turquoise. You might start to think that turquoise is the highest level, and that because of this, turquoise is perfect. And therefore, a person cannot be turquoise unless they are the perfect moral exemplar, unless they are like some Jesus figure or some Buddha figure who cannot commit any kind of mistakes and is infallible. This would be a big mistake to think of turquoise this way. Turquoise doesn't make you moral or good at all. You're not good for being turquoise, and you're not moral for being turquoise. Turquoise doesn't make you special. So be careful about trying to pursue turquoise as some sort of egoic goal, like, oh yeah, I gotta climb the spiral to the top, and then that's when my life will be sweetest. I mean, it's true that you want to go higher, and it's true that turquoise will be pretty sweet compared to other stages, but it doesn't make you special. So be careful about building some spiritual ego around that. Also, turquoise doesn't make you enlightened. I think there's plenty of turquoise people around who are not enlightened. I think enlightenment is something actually way beyond turquoise and really transcends all models, transcends all categories, transcends all language and all descriptions. So enlightenment is its own thing. Don't confuse it with spiral dynamics. Turquoise will not make you immune to making mistakes. You can still make mistakes. Turquoise will not make you immune to false beliefs. It will not make you immune to cultural biases. Culture is something that's rooted very deeply in your mind. And even if you become enlightened, you're still going to have cultural beliefs and preferences and values which are operating on you just from the culture that you grew up in, whether you grew up a Hindu or a Muslim or an American, that stuff is informing how you teach, it's informing how you talk, it's informing the analogies and metaphors you use, it's informing your preferences and many, many other things. And you can certainly become closed to other traditions and other cultures just by not opening yourself up to them or not being familiar enough with them. Turquoise does not make you immune to dangerous social ideas. You can still have bad political ideas, bad public policies. Just because a turquoise person thinks they have the solution to some of society's problems doesn't mean that those solutions will actually work out, because governmental problems are very complicated. They often backfire. And a lot of what government is about trying new ideas that you don't know whether they're going to work yet. You got to try them out and test them in the crucible of reality, rather than just in your own head. And oftentimes what works well in your head doesn't work well in reality. So you still got to be careful. It's still possible that you will hurt people. As turquoise, you're not immune from hurting people, whether intimately in relationships or students that you have, or business partners, or humanity at large. Turquoise is not immune to sexual cravings, and turquoise is not immune to addictions. Now, of course, it's probably not likely you're going to find a turquoise heroin addict, but you can probably still find turquoise people who have certain kinds of addictions, whether it's to social media or television or whatever else. It's very hard to overcome all the various cultural addictions that we have today. Bad food, etc. Although, of course, generally speaking, turquoise will have cleaned a lot of that stuff up. Otherwise, it would be really hard to get to turquoise if you had some of those monkeys on your back. All right, so let's talk about how to transcend turquoise. Well, actually, the point here is that you shouldn't worry about transcending turquoise. What you should really worry about is embodying turquoise. Some people talk about stage coral in spiral dynamics, which is supposed to be the next stage after turquoise. I'm not going to talk about it. Frankly, it's just a waste of time. People who talk and speculate about about coral, are just wasting their time, because they're not even at turquoise yet. And there's so much to embody within turquoise that you can spend the next 40 years working on turquoise, and you're still not going to be done. And really, your goal, once you get to turquoise, your goal should be to pursue non-duality to its fullest, and really to transcend spiral dynamics and just sort of forget spiral dynamics. It's a useful model, but after a certain point, you're going to go beyond this model. If you do a lot of yoga, meditation, contemplation, self-inquiry, you're going to go beyond this model, and it will have served its usefulness to you. It will still be useful in the sense that you will be able to use it to look back and to analyze other people, and you will be able to use it as a spiral wizard to communicate with lower stages, but you yourself will go beyond it. So here's how to embody turquoise. Make sure you have a hardcore, industrial-grade spiritual practice going, whether that's meditation, yoga, self-inquiry, contemplation, or whatever else. Contemplate everything. Don't just contemplate who am I or what reality is. Contemplate all the stuff. Contemplate little things as well. What is language? What are relationships? What is sexuality? What is politics? What is government? I mean, you can contemplate a list of 1,000 different things. You can contemplate every day for the rest of your life, and you still won't even scratch the surface of all the stuff that there is to contemplate. But the more you do that, the more interconnectedness you're going to see in everything, the more you're going to understand everything, and the more fleshed out your non-duality will become. Embody unconditional love. That's a whole lot of work right there. Of course, it helps to have deep non-dual experiences to do that. You can't just embody it through pure belief, which is maybe something that Green tries to do, but it doesn't really work. But still, you got to work on it. Because you can be enlightened, but you can still be a jerk, an asshole, a prick. You can still be inconsiderate. You can still really not have opened your heart completely. So that's something to work on. Long solo retreats are very, very effective for deepening your connection with being, which then allows you to be more turquoise. spiritual purification work of various kinds, shadow work. Do psychedelics, especially 5-MeO-DMT is extremely effective for getting you into turquoise or for deepening your understanding of turquoise. Join or start some kind of spiritual community. If you have a vision for mankind and you want to be a leader, then that's a great opportunity for you. It's going to be hard to fully embody turquoise without some kind of communal connection, because that's really what turquoise is about. So that's important. Whether you start a community or whether you just find an existing one to join, or maybe you can be a co-leader or some kind of manager in some sort of existing community. Read turquoise books. I have a lot of those on my book list. Meet turquoise sages face to face. There's dozens and hundreds of them today on this planet, and through the magic of the internet, they are quite easy to find. Study many religions. Make sure that your mystical insights aren't just coming from one tradition or one school, but you're integrating more and more. That's going to make you a better teacher. That's going to round out and draw a lot of interconnections that otherwise you wouldn't see, and it's going to deepen your understanding of this stuff. Study cutting-edge science, because there's stuff within science that's valuable, and so really you need to have that merger of spirituality and science working together, especially because a lot of the people you'll be talking to or teaching or leading, they're going to be scientifically minded, and so you need to know how to speak to them and appeal to them. Study non-dual theory deeply. If you haven't read 30 books about non-duality or enlightenment, then you're not serious about waking up, and you will probably fail. If you succeed, it'll be just by fluke luck, by accident, because there's so many traps, so many nuances to this work. Go read at least 30 books. And if you want an example of which books to read, then check out my book list. I have at least 30 books. I probably have more like 50 books about non-duality on my book list. Open your chakras, especially all the lower ones, and your heart chakra. Transmute your sexual energy. That can be very powerful for going deeper into turquoise. Sexuality, when you use it indiscriminately, in a sort of frivolous way, can waste a lot of your time and energy and emotions, which could otherwise be channeled into something like building your spiritual community or developing emotional mastery or deepening your various states of consciousness. Learn alternative healing techniques. That can be quite amazing. You can help a lot of people with that. You can also help to heal yourself. Also, to really master turquoise, make sure you go back and you master all the lower stages. Revisit, go all the way back to even to blue, and ask yourself, what am I missing from blue that I haven't fully integrated and embodied? What am I missing from orange? What am I missing from green? What am I missing from yellow? There's probably, even if you're at turquoise, there's probably stuff you're still missing from the lower stages. You're not fully well-rounded yet. So go back and master those. There's a lot of depth at every stage. And of course, keep watching actualize.org, because a lot of the stuff that I'll be talking about in the future and that I've been talking about over the last year or two has already been turquoise stuff, and we'll continue to go deeper in that direction. So that's turquoise for you. In conclusion, be careful. Be careful not to hold turquoise as the best. There is no such thing as the best. Every stage is necessary, and turquoise is just one stage, and there will probably be stages beyond turquoise in the future, but it'll probably be way past your lifetime. Because culture and society is always evolving, and we're not sure where it's evolving to. When we have virtual reality and artificial intelligence, and we have robots and all this sort of stuff in the next 100, 200 years, genetic engineering, like all sorts of crazy stuff. We're going to have psychedelics. 5-MeO is going to be legal and widely accessible to everybody, right? So society is going to change enormously over the next 200 years. And where it's going to go, we have no idea. But that'll be exciting for the next generation, maybe for your children or your children's children. All right, that's it. I'm done with this episode, and this is the end for this Spiral Dynamics mini-series. Now, I still want to go back and talk about what? Purple and red. I'm not going to talk about beige. But I feel a little exhausted talking for the last month about Spiral Dynamics. So I'm not going to be talking about purple or red next week. I'm going to hold off and release those episodes sometime in the future because I think you guys have gotten the gist of Spiral Dynamics at this point. You're probably sick of me talking about it, just like I'm a little sick of talking about it. So we'll talk about other interesting and profound topics next time. And so stay tuned. And then we will come back and cover purple and red. So that's it. Please come check out my website. That's actualize.org. Oh, don't forget to click the like button for me. That helps the video to become more visible. Come check out actualize.org, my book list, the Life Purpose course, the forum, the blog. And just stick with me, because there's still many deep metaphysical and epistemic topics that I want to talk about. It's just like so much stuff. My biggest problem is that we have way too many topics to talk about than I have energy to talk about, energy to think about every single week. It's just exhausting to try to articulate all this stuff because, well, it's infinite. It goes on forever. You can talk about this stuff forever. You can make new distinctions. You can point out interesting nuances and facets. And we've really just started to scratch the surface of where these videos will go. And if you want to start to understand that stuff and you don't want to get lost, maybe you're already feeling a little lost, then you got to start doing the work. Start doing the practices, the spiritual practices, other kinds of practices. Start, now that you have this map of Spiral Dynamics, start moving up the stages wherever you're at. If you're at orange, start moving up to green. If you're at green, start moving up to yellow and so forth. Because if you're not doing that, what's going to happen is that I'm going to outgrow you. These videos will become way too advanced. They're just going to turn into mental masturbation and philosophy for you because they're not going to be grounded in any kind of real experiences that you have. And so that's going to actually stifle your growth. So the cost of entertaining some of these profound topics that I talk about is that you have to do the work. You can't just sit back on your ass and watch these like some sort of Seinfeld episodes just for your own entertainment. You got to put some skin into the game. So do that and stick around. And the dessert for that will be that as you do the work, every week I release some new video with some new profound insight. And then that kind of juices you up. That gets you excited. That maybe gets you a new idea of which direction to go into. And so that's how these videos should be used. Don't use them just for philosophy.